Welcome back, Shattered Trust Stories. It was one of those calm evenings, the type where the weight of the world seemed so distant, and the only sounds in our house were the soft clinks of plates and the steady hum of the dishwasher. But everything changed that night. Paul had always been the type to keep his thoughts to himself, but as we stood there in the kitchen, the silence between us felt heavier than usual. Anna, I've been thinking, he began, his voice softer than I was used to. We should move in with Mom. She's all alone in that big house. At first, I thought I misheard him. It wasn't that I hadn't noticed how distant he had become after his father passed. But moving in with his mom? It felt sudden and out of nowhere. For 5 years, it had just been the two of us, building a life together. The thought of sharing our space with someone else, especially his mom, made my heart sink. Paul, I don't know if that's such a good idea, I said cautiously, setting down the dish I was washing. We've never really talked about living with her before. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he just stared at the floor, his hands running through his hair. I could see the exhaustion in his face, the way his eyes looked like they hadn't had a good night's sleep in weeks. She's grieving, Anna. She needs us, Paul said finally, his voice tinged with guilt. I don't want her to feel alone. It was in that moment that I realized how much this meant to him. His mom, Elaine, had been through so much since his father passed. I understood the need for family, but the idea of our lives being turned upside down still felt daunting. I tried to mask my unease with a smile, but inside, I felt a storm brewing. Okay, Paul, if you think it's the best thing for her, we can try it. But let's not rush into anything, all right? The next few weeks were a blur of packing, moving boxes, and adjusting to life in a house that wasn't truly mine. Elaine was a kind woman, but living under the same roof as her was an entirely different experience. She had a way of making every little detail feel like an obligation, like I was never quite doing enough. Still, I pushed my discomfort aside because this was what Paul wanted. It wasn't supposed to be forever, just a temporary arrangement until she could get back on her feet. But then came the night that changed everything. That IT had been a particularly difficult day. Elaine had spent hours organizing the kitchen, rearranging every shelf and cabinet, while Paul was at work, leaving me to handle everything else. I was exhausted mentally and physically, trying to juggle my teaching job, the chores, and the constant tension that seemed to hang in the air. When Paul came home that evening, I barely had the energy to speak, but he could tell something was wrong. Anna, what's going on? He asked, his brow furrowed with concern that I looked at him, feeling the weight of everything on my shoulders. Paul, I don't think I can keep doing this. I feel like I'm losing myself. This isn't the life I imagined. He reached out to hold my hand, his touch gentle, but his eyes were filled with a deep uncertainty. I know, Anna. It's just, Mom needs us, and I need you to understand that. But his words felt hollow, and it wasn't just the house or his mother that was making me feel suffocated. It was him. He wasn't the man I married anymore. He had changed that a few days later. After a particularly heated argument with Elaine, Paul came home late one night. He didn't even look at me when he entered the house. Instead, he went straight to the living room and collapsed onto the couch. I can't do this anymore, Paul muttered, his voice rough with emotion. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. My heart skipped a beat. What are you talking about? He turned to face me, his eyes wild with frustration. I've been hiding it for months, but I can't keep living this lie. Anna, I have a second family. I stared at him, unable to comprehend what he was saying. What? What do you mean, a second family? Paul let out a harsh laugh, but it was empty, devoid of any humor. I've been seeing someone else, Anna. She's been there for me, giving me everything I've been missing. And now, I can't just turn my back on her. My world shattered in an instant. Everything I thought I knew about my husband, our marriage, and our life together had come crumbling down. He had been living a double life, and I had no idea. You're leaving me for her? I whispered, my voice shaking. Paul didn't answer right away. He seemed to struggle with his emotions, as if torn between the two lives he had built. Finally, he nodded, the pain in his eyes more than I could bear. I'm sorry, Anna. I never wanted to hurt you, but I can't ignore what's real anymore. I need to be with her. I felt my heart break in a way I didn't know was possible. All the love, all the years we had spent together seemed so meaningless now. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I just stood there, numb, trying to process the devastation that was unfolding in front of me. But then, an hour later, Paul's voice rang out through the house again. It wasn't the voice of the man I had loved, but one filled with rage and confusion. Anna, you have to understand, this isn't just about me. It's about what we've become. I can't live this way anymore. I didn't know what to say. The man I had spent years with was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. And as he screamed in the other room, I realized that our life together, the one I had fought for and cherished, had come to an end. The days started to feel longer after the decision to move into Elaine's house. What should have been a temporary measure, meant to support Paul's grieving mother, started to drag on, and with every passing day, the unease in my heart grew. Paul and I were no longer the couple I had once known. The man I married was slipping further away, replaced by someone who seemed like a stranger. The IT wasn't just the move itself. It was the way everything seemed to shift, the way Paul's attention turned away from me. We'd gone from being a team to me being a mere spectator in our own life. At first, I tried to reassure myself that it was just the grief, the pressure of trying to support his mother, the confusion of such a huge life change. But as the weeks turned into months, I couldn't ignore the growing gap between us. The house we now lived in was old and creaky, filled with memories of Paul's childhood. Elena tried to make me feel welcome, but I could tell she had her own struggles to deal with. She seemed to hover around Paul all the time, like a bird afraid to fly alone. But what really bothered me was how much she seemed to rely on him for emotional support. It felt like everything was about her, about keeping her comfortable, about making sure she didn't feel the loss of her husband too acutely. For me, it was a constant battle. I tried to remain patient, tried to be the supportive wife, but my efforts felt futile. I was lost in a house that wasn't mine, walking on eggshells, afraid to speak up for fear of upsetting the fragile balance that had formed between Paul and his mother. And the more I gave, the more it felt like I was losing myself a teen night. When we'd lay in bed together, I would stare at the ceiling, wondering what had happened to us. I missed the man I had married, the man who would laugh at the silliest things and who would wrap me in his arms when I felt insecure. Now, I felt like I was living with a shell of the person he used to be. His touch had become distant, his words short and devoid of affection. It wasn't just the move that had changed him. It was something deeper, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. One evening, after dinner, Paul and I were sitting in the living room, the silence between us as thick as ever. Elaine had retired early to her room, as she often did. The TV was on, but neither of us was really watching it. It was the kind of silence that made the air feel heavy, like something was about to break. "Anna, we need to talk," Paul said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost strained. I glanced at him, heart pounding. I could feel that something was coming. I had no idea what, but the tension in his tone made it clear. "What's going on, Paul?" He hesitated, his hands gripping the armrest of the couch. He seemed lost for words, as if searching for the right way to say whatever was on his mind. The moment stretched on, and I could feel my pulse quicken. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," he finally said, his voice cracking slightly. "About us, about our life together." I held my breath, unsure of where this conversation was going. "And I just don't know if I can keep pretending anymore," he said, looking away from me. "I feel trapped, Anna." The words hit me like a slap in the face. Trapped? I couldn't understand it. We had built this life together, hadn't we? Through thick and thin. Hadn't we promised each other we would always be there? I could feel my stomach drop. "What do you mean trapped?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Paul's eyes finally met mine, and there was a sadness in them that I couldn't recognize. "I've been trying to make it work. I really have. But Everything has changed, and I don't know if I can go on like this. I didn't know what to say. My mind raced, searching for some sign that this wasn't as bad as it sounded. Paul, we're in this together. We can figure it out. He shook his head. I don't think we can. You don't see it, but it's like I've been living two separate lives. I'm not the person I was when we got married, and I don't know if I can be that person again. I stared at him in disbelief. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him understand what he was saying. But all I could do was sit there, numb, as he continued. Anna, I've been seeing someone else, he said, his voice flat, like he had rehearsed this for days that I blinked, unable to process his words. What? What are you talking about? I've been seeing her for months, Anna. She's been there for me when you weren't. She listens to me, understands me in a way you can't. I didn't want to hurt you, but I can't keep lying. The room seemed to spin as his words sank in. My body went cold, and I could barely breathe. The pain was so overwhelming that it felt like I was drowning in it. This was real. He was telling me that everything I had known about our marriage was a lie. You're leaving me for her? I whispered, my voice breaking. I'm sorry, Paul said, looking away again, unable to meet my gaze. I never meant for it to happen this way, but I can't keep living this double life. I can't keep pretending I'm happy when I'm not. I wanted to scream at him, to make him understand how much this hurt. But the words wouldn't come. I just sat there in complete shock as he turned away from me. The next hour felt like an eternity. I didn't know what to do or say. I felt like my world had just been ripped apart. But then, as I sat there, lost in my own devastation, I heard Paul's voice again. This time, it wasn't calm or resigned. It was full of anger, frustration, and something else, fear. Anna, you need to understand, he shouted from the living room that I rushed to his side, only to find him pacing, his face flushed with emotion. What's going on? I asked, my voice shaking. I'm not the person you think I am, he yelled, his hands trembling. I've been living a lie, and now I don't know who I am anymore. I'm losing everything. It was then that I realized the man I had known, the man I had loved, was completely unraveling. His secret life had caught up with him, and now he didn't know how to handle the consequences that I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to help him, or even if I should. All I knew was that everything had changed, and I was no longer the person he needed me to be. And the truth was, I wasn't sure if I could ever be that person again. As the days turned into weeks, the weight of everything began to settle deeper in my chest. The house that was once a place of warmth had started to feel like a prison. I was trapped in a life that didn't feel like mine anymore. The more I tried to make things work, the more I felt like I was losing myself. The woman I had been before seemed like a distant memory, a version of me I could barely recognize. That I would wake up each morning, feeling the familiar tension in the pit of my stomach, knowing that I would face another day of living in a house that wasn't mine. I would walk through the hallways of Elaine's home, her presence always looming. It was like I could never escape her, even when I was in my own room. The walls felt too thin, the air too thick. Elaine had become so wrapped up in Paul that she seemed to overlook me completely. She would ask about every little thing, whether I needed a coat or what I was having for lunch. But the things that mattered to me, the things that once mattered to Paul, were no longer part of the conversation. That I tried to talk to him about it. But every time I opened my mouth, the words felt stuck, like they had no place in this new life we had built. It seemed like no matter how much I tried to express my feelings, Paul's gaze would wander to his mother. He was consumed with guilt over her grief, over the loss of his father. And I was left to fend for myself, a silent observer in a house that no longer felt like a home. That it wasn't long before I noticed the cracks starting to show. Paul was more distant than ever. He would come home from work, barely speaking a word to me, only to retire to the living room where he would sit, lost in his own thoughts. And when I tried to reach out to him, he would brush me off, as if my presence was a reminder of something he was trying to escape. It was clear that something had shifted in him, something I couldn't explain. The man I had married, the one who held me close during our late-night talks and laughed with me over silly moments, was slipping away from me. I didn't know who he had become or why he was so different, but I could feel it. The cold distance that seemed to stretch between us. One evening, as I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the half-empty cup of tea in front of me, I realized how much I had changed too. I used to be strong, confident, someone who believed in the future we had built together. But now, I was just going through the motions, hoping for some kind of sign, a flicker of hope that things might go back to normal. I no longer recognized the woman in the mirror. I was starting to lose my sense of self, and I didn't know how to stop it. It was then that Paul approached me. He looked tired, his eyes heavy, as if he hadn't slept in days. But there was something else in his eyes, a kind of uncertainty, as if he didn't know how to speak the words that had been weighing on him for so long. I looked at him, my heart heavy, waiting for him to say something, anything, that would make sense of all this. But when he opened his mouth, I realized that whatever came next would shatter everything. "Anna, we need to talk," he said, his voice barely above a whisper that I felt a chill run through me. I had been bracing for this moment, knowing that something was coming, but hearing him say it aloud made my stomach turn. The air in the room seemed to grow thicker, and I could feel my pulse quicken. "About what?" I asked, my voice shaky, trying to keep my composure. I, I've been thinking a lot," he began, his words slow and measured, as if he were carefully choosing each one. "About everything. About us. About our life together." I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. "What are you trying to say, Paul?" He hesitated, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for the right words. "I don't know how to explain this, but I can't keep pretending anymore. I'm not the person I was when we got married. I've changed, Anna. I've been seeing someone else." The words hit me like a freight train, and for a moment, everything around me blurred. The room felt like it was closing in, and I could barely catch my breath. I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. "What? What do you mean, someone else?" I asked, my voice breaking. I couldn't fathom it. He had to be joking. This couldn't be real. "I didn't want this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you," Paul said, his voice trembling. "But I've been seeing her for months. I didn't know what I was doing at first. I didn't know what I was missing. But now I can't go back." I stood there in stunned silence, unable to move, unable to speak. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted, had betrayed me in a way I could never have imagined. He had given himself to someone else, and all the while, I had been trying to hold on to something that was slipping through my fingers. "I never meant for this to happen, Anna," he continued, his voice filled with regret. "But I've been living two lives, and I can't keep doing it. I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not. I've been so lost, and I don't know if I can fix this. I don't know if I even want it anymore." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make him understand the depth of the pain he was causing. But all I could do was stand there numb, my world falling apart around me. "You're leaving me for her?" I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "I don't know what to say anymore," he said, his voice low, as if he couldn't look me in the eye. "I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending I'm happy when I'm not. And I'm sorry, Anna. I really am. But I need to go." It was like my heart had shattered in 1,000 pieces. The man I had once known, the man I thought I would grow old with, was now standing in front of me, telling me that it was over. There was nothing left to say. There was nothing left to do. That I turned away from him, my chest tight, unable to breathe. I couldn't look at him anymore. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know who I was anymore. Everything had changed in the blink of an eye. And then, just as I was about to retreat to my room, I heard Paul's voice again, this time filled with something darker, something desperate. "Anna, you don't understand. This isn't just about me. This is about what we've become. This isn't who we were supposed to be." I turned around, confusion and anger flooding through me. "What are you talking about?" He ran his hands through his hair, his face twisted in frustration. "I can't live this lie anymore. I've been living two lives, one with you and one with her. And now, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know how to fix this, but I can't stay here." I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know how to make sense of what he was saying. I had never seen him like this, so broken, so lost. But as much as I wanted to help him, as much as I wanted to hold on to the life we had built together, I couldn't ignore the fact that everything had changed. And maybe, just maybe, it was too late to go back. As the words hung in the air, thick with the weight of betrayal, I could barely breathe. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The man who had once been my everything, the man I had loved with every fiber of my being, was standing before me, broken and confessing his lies. And yet there was no part of me that could believe it. How could this be real? How could he throw away everything we had built? I don't know how to fix this, Santa, Paul repeated, his voice barely audible, as if he had given up on even trying. I wish I could go back, but I can't. I stood there, motionless, my body trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. I had spent years building a life with him, a life I thought was full of love and trust. And now, everything was slipping through my fingers like sand. But just as I thought my heart couldn't shatter any further, he dropped the bombshell that I never saw coming. "There's something you need to know," he said, his eyes suddenly darting to the floor, that I felt a coldness creep over me, a sensation that sent chills down my spine. What more could he possibly have to say? How could anything else make this worse? I, I've been seeing her, and I'm not leaving her, Anna, Paul said, his words crashing over me like a tidal wave that I didn't understand. I couldn't process it. He was telling me that everything I had believed in, the future we had planned, the love we had shared, meant nothing to him. "I'm in love with her," Paul whispered, almost as if he couldn't even bring himself to speak it aloud. The air in the room seemed to stop moving, the weight of his words suffocating me. I felt like I was drowning in disbelief. My breath was shallow, my chest tight. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who I was anymore, that I thought I knew him. I thought I understood what he wanted. But now, I was standing in a house that wasn't mine, with a man who wasn't mine, and everything was falling apart faster than I could comprehend. "Why, Paul?" I whispered, the pain in my voice raw and broken. "Why didn't you just tell me?" He looked up at me, his face a mask of guilt and sorrow. "I didn't want to hurt you, but I'm sorry. I can't keep pretending." I shook my head, as if somehow the movement could make the reality of the situation go away. "This isn't the man I married. This isn't who I thought you were." Paul stepped closer to me, but I backed away, not wanting to be near him anymore. His touch, once so comforting, now felt like an invasion. "Anna, please." "I didn't want it to happen this way. I never wanted to hurt you," he begged, his voice breaking. But I was already beyond the point of no return. I had given him everything. I had sacrificed myself for him, for us, and he had thrown it all away. And the worst part was that it wasn't just a mistake anymore. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a choice. He had chosen her over me. "Go," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "Just go." There was a silence between us, thick with regret and sorrow. Paul opened his mouth to speak, but the words never came. Instead, he turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing in the empty space, leaving me standing there, broken that I felt like I was falling, like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I wanted to scream, to cry out, to let the world know what had just happened. But no sound came. I was completely alone in a house that no longer felt like home. Days passed, and the emptiness in my heart grew. I threw myself into work, into anything that could distract me from the reality of the life I now found myself in. But no matter how busy I kept myself, there was always that nagging feeling at the back of my mind, reminding me that nothing would ever be the same again. Then one evening, I received a message that changed everything. That IT was from an unknown number. "I know what happened, Anna," the message read. "I know everything." My fingers froze over my phone as a sense of dread filled me. Who could it be? How did they know? And why were they reaching out to me now? The message continued. "Meet me. I have something you need to know about Paul and the other woman." My heart raced. I didn't know whether I was terrified or relieved. Was this the truth I had been searching for? Or was it just another twist in this nightmare? Without thinking, I replied, "Where and when?" The phone buzzed with a response. "Tomorrow, 5 p.m., the old cafe by the lake." I stared at the screen, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Who could this person be? What could they possibly want to tell me? But the one thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't back down. I had to know the truth. I had to understand why everything had fallen apart. And so, with my heart pounding in my chest, I made my decision. I would go that I didn't know what awaited me at that cafe, but I knew one thing. I was done being in the dark. I would uncover the secrets that had shattered my world, no matter the cost. The next day, I prepared myself for the unknown, for the confrontation that would change everything. As I drove to the cafe, my thoughts raced, trying to piece together the mystery. Who was this person? What was Paul hiding? Was there something deeper to this betrayal? I had no answers, but I knew that whatever I learned at that cafe would be the final chapter in this twisted story. When I arrived, the cafe was quiet, its tables empty except for one person sitting by the window. The figure looked familiar, but I couldn't quite place them. I approached cautiously, my breath shallow. "Anna," the figure said, looking up at me. "I'm glad you came. There's a lot you don't know." And with those words, I knew that my life was about to change once again. But this time, I was ready for the truth. The scene fades as Anna sits down, the tension thick in the air. What secrets will she uncover? Will Paul's betrayal be the end of the story, or the beginning of an even deeper mystery? The truth is just out of reach, and Anna is about to discover how far her husband's lies go. And with every truth revealed, there's always more to be uncovered.